Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. It's a very wonderful and very informative lecture. We have a couple of comments from the chat box, but again, as I've mentioned in the chat box as well, if you have any questions you wanted to ask, you can put in the chat box, or you can raise your hand virtually through the symbol button, and then I'll be notified and I'll let you speak as well. So there is a comment by Dr. Munira Alatas, who are also from Allianz Center of Governance. I'm actually here in their events actually, saying that, I mean, apart from the conjunctions that you've mentioned on all the manifestations of it, we see as well authoritarian right wing and movements coming in, and this all connected to the sort of phenomena of colonialism. And in fact, I think she asserted that the world has never left colonialism per se, and in fact, we are basically living in a
Yeah,
neo-colonial era.
yeah.
Um, so what's your comment on that? I mean, are we living in a neo-colonial, and what's are the sort of differences you say that between this old colonial order and the new colonial order? And I was seeing another
Yeah.
stage of it right now as well.
Yes, yes. I mean, of course, I mean, I can't, I wouldn't disagree at all with what has been said. The question is whether there are perhaps more helpful ways to think about it, because and as I already pointed out, I mean that in the second part, I'm going to talk about uh, the politics of knowledge systems, which is really all about um, the intellectual apparatus of colonialism and the work that it continues to do. All right. So in that sense, I agree entirely. But we have to remember that that we don't have colonies, obviously, in the sense in which one had in the days of the colonial empires. What we have is a conception of empire. All right, so there's a significant body of recent work. There was a book that came out, for example, by Hart and Negri called Empire about 20 some years ago, which led to a lot of discussion about how we think about the question of colonialism today. And the argument there was that, well, we have to really think about empire and we have to think about the different manifestations of empire. But if you're really looking at, so, for example, when I described the international rule-based order, I made it very clear, didn't I, right? That look, I mean, the powerful have never subscribed to it anyhow. They do exactly what they want to do. So in that sense, of course, I agree. But at the same time, we cannot think of colonialism, as one undifferentiated history over the last, 300-400 years. We are still living in the history that was generated as a consequence of the European expansions. I mean, it's still the European era in some ways, although to a lesser degree than it was, certainly in the 18th and 19th centuries. But there's no question that in a great many respects, the world as we know it today has largely been shaped by the Euro-American intervention, which began 500 years ago, and we're still seeing, still seeing it in various guises. But we'd
Mm.
have to we'd have to introduce a lot of nuances into this discussion to see why, as I said, it may be helpful in some ways, and in other ways it may not be so helpful to simply see it as one continuity. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Another question from Muhammad Zubair, which is quite interesting as well, because I mean he says that are these crises, I mean all these 11 pieces that you observe that are happening today, are they somewhat interconnected? I mean, there is a discussion about polycrisis, for example, right? Where these
Yeah.
are not just a multiple crises, but these are entangled crises that it's really hard for us to pick one to focus on without affecting the other. And there's always almost a deadlock, in fact.
But
Is
that's
that
what
what
the
you're
word
saying as well?
conjuncture means.
Yeah.
That's what the conjuncture means. They're all present together. And
Mhm.
therefore there is some relationship. So it's a conjuncture. They've all see, some of them have been present before. Inequality, even massive inequality has been there before. The slide towards authoritarianism has been there before, for example. But 50 years ago, was there global warming? It was happening, but we didn't know of it.
Yeah.
We didn't have the vocabulary for it.
But do
When
you
was that? We didn't have the vocabulary for 50 years ago. No one would have used an expression called climate refugees 75 years ago. You give me a single text which
yeah,
shows that, okay? So it's the conjuncture. And are they related? Yes, they're related. But when things are related, you still have to disaggregate them to understand the force of each,
right.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think generally when there are some pessimisms as well when people discuss about this multiple crisis, and one of the arguments that they are making is because of the entanglement of all of these crises, that is seems to imply a deadlock. Is that something that you see as well? And it's a doomsday kind of a way of looking at the
Well,
world, but yeah,
yeah. I mean, I didn't use the word deadlock myself, but but I said that. Look, I mean, I think that we it's there is instinct within us, no matter what time we're living in, to think that we're living in the worst possible times, and that's why I said, imagine you were living through the Holocaust. Imagine you were living through World War II and the siege of Stalingrad, or in Rwanda during the Rwandan genocide, in which in a period of 3 months, almost 1 million people were killed, or what's happening in parts of Africa even now, right? Now you would say that what would it mean for them to think that of the whole set of problems that they're living at a moment of great peril to them. Now, having allowed for that, the fact that everybody likes to think of their own times as especially a times of peril, I'm suggesting that the conjuncture at the present has actually created a situation which we have not seen in history before. Because we are now speaking about the the threat, a concrete threat to planetary existence. And this is where you do have to think about global warming. You have to think about nuclear apocalypse. You have to think about all of this. You have to think about species extinction. The rate at which species are dying is remarkably fast, even though there are preservation attempts and all of that. And global warming, no matter what kind of technological solution you think of, most people with money think of technological solutions, carbon capture, and there are different methods of carbon capture. In my view, it's all a total fallacy, and in fact will make the situation worse because it doesn't address fundamentally many of the other things that are associated with. So that's why I was saying, let's think about human beings as I said, Homo consumptio, right? The humans are an uniquely wasteful, uniquely wasteful species. Other species do not waste the way that we waste. And we now come to a point where we can't afford to do that. You see, right? So I think we have to think about what are some of the new elements in the picture, what are some of the elements that have been there before. Uh, um, but even that slide towards authoritarianism, uh, yes, I'm aware of what happened in India when emergency was because some people will say, well, why is it really new? But the capture of state institutions in India today is totally unprecedented, and in the U.S. They're capturing every state institution, the fascists, if we want to call them that, the authoritarians, whatever word one wants to use, and they're attentive to every sphere of life. That's very important. It's not simply, what ICE is doing, immigration enforcement. That's what makes the news. Do you know, for example, that the Pentagon had issued an order saying that all official documents must be in Times New Roman 12? What a Why would they do that? Because they say that people use courier, which is too feminine. Okay?
yeah,
So this is the military, this is the US military. We have to be masculine. And we need a proper font for all the documents. Right? Now they're attentive to every domain. They're moving into museums, into universities, into what gets funded at the state level. That's what I mean by the capture of state institutions. In the McCarthy period, you did not have the capture of state institutions at that level. You had repression. And they tried to put down, of course, eliminate the communists and make life difficult, for the few communists in this country. And they obviously created difficulties for people who are involved in the civil rights movement. But we are seeing something on a much greater magnitude, and it's not finished yet.
Hmm.
It's a long ways to go.
Right.
Long ways to go. Yeah.
Right. Prof, I have a lot more questions, I guess, from the chat box, but I think I wanted to pass the floor to Mr. Imran. If you can
Yes.
unmute yourself and deliver your questions to the floor.
Yeah. Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Shahzad. You're muted. You're muted. You can't be heard.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for such a wonderful lecture. After the points you have mentioned, I assume or I make it that definitely the issue you have raised up here for
I think
climate change.
the audio is a bit
Blurred. Yeah.
blurred. Yeah. So can you repeat that again? Maybe.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sir, my question is that the question to raise, like climate change, the issue of migrants, these are not, I think, these cannot be settled or addressed by by the nation states. Nation states are not capable to resolve these. So, what should be the next step or how these could be resolved? Because it is not in the capacity of the nation states to resolve. My second question is that
Can you hold on 1 second? Just one moment. One moment. Imran, can you just? I can't get the audio. It's not clear to me. Did you understand it?
I think
yes,
because I think the audio is a bit blurry as well. But if I recall, I mean, is it something to do with the incapability of the nation state to resolve the migrant crisis that we are seeing today? So that's the questions, right? Yeah.
Yeah. The inability of the nation state to resolve the migrant crisis. Is that what you're asking about?
Exactly. And climate change.
And climate change as well.
And what, sorry?
Climate change.
Climate change. Yeah. No, but yeah. So I mean, I don't know exactly what the question is. I know what you're asking about, but the inability of the nation state to resolve the migrant crisis arises from the fact that a nation state is an entity. It's a political community, right? We didn't have nation states before the 17th century. We had empires. In most parts of the world, there were empires, but there were also city-states. If you go to what is now called Italy, for example, I mean, there was the Roman Empire before that as well, of course. But there were different kinds of political entities. A nation state is a entity which is born out of the experience of Europe. And what I'm saying is that the nation state intrinsically is a form that leans towards homogenization. Why do nation states have a national anthem? National anthem. Everybody must subscribe to the national anthem, right? What does it do? It creates subjects who will all give their loyalty to that nation state. A nation state demands undivided loyalty. That's what it demands. And it produces homogenization at every level. So one of the first things that a nation state does when it comes into being is it creates a set of textbooks, especially history textbooks. I've looked at, for example, history textbooks in Pakistan very closely. And when the whole regime of textbooks started, and almost as soon as Pakistan was born, with the partition of India, Pakistan started, the state authorized textbooks to produce an authentic history of Pakistan. Now, the answer to your question, because first we have to say, what is a nation state? You see, the migrant is intrinsically a mobile figure. See, populations that are mobile are always seen as a threat. The classic example, of course, is a population that is by definition mobile, which is the Roma. The Roma, right? What people colloquially call gypsies. Um, in every European country, the Roma are discriminated against. In every European country, they're discriminated against. And why they're discriminated against? Because they don't put down roots. They're mobile. They don't domesticate themselves. They don't want to have a home on a certain ground. Okay? Now, this population, therefore, is a population that is not a population that can be controlled by the state. I was just speaking about all of this to my PhD seminar yesterday, but there's an anthropologist called James Scott, and he makes a distinction between state spaces and non-state spaces. And so non-state spaces are spaces that cannot, in a sense, be controlled by the state, right? That produces enormous anxiety in the state. And that's the answer to your question. That's why they cannot resolve the migrant crisis, because the migrant, whether they're sending the migrant or whether they're receiving the migrant, okay, is immaterial, because the migrant who is being sent, that's no longer a problem. So you think to yourself, for the nation state that is sending it, but no, but that migrant has then relations with the mother country and can influence politics there, etc. But it's of course principally the migrant you receive, right? Now this migrant therefore is a figure that in some ways cannot be controlled within the state, is unassimilable, right? Is cannot be assimilated into the norms and ethos of the nation state. And that's why this continues to be a pressing problem. Then, of course, there are hundreds of other things you can add to that. It depends on who the migrant is, what associations that migrant creates, within a country, what ideas they have of the culture of that particular migrant, et cetera, right? And global warming is not a problem that can be sorted only at the level of the nation state. Nation states can do some things to alleviate some of the problems created by global warming, but those are really simply solutions which are temporary in that sense. So, China is a very good illustration of a country that has tried to alleviate some of the problems of global warming, of climate change. It has prepared itself much better because it has been gravitating towards what you might call green energy, right? Right? It's been gravitating towards that. That's one reason, by the way, it's weathering the Iran crisis better than a lot of other countries, because it's been gravitating towards solar energy. China produces 95% of the world's solar panels, by the way, 95%. Okay, right? Large parts of China are gravitating towards green energy, but is that ultimately a solution? I'm suggesting to you it's not, because it's still working within the technological frame. That's the technicist problem. That this is the fallacy, that you resolve the problem that has been created by these new technologies that we had, okay, which then led to global warming and increased consumption. New technologies, meaning including cars. Right? And you create other technologies to counter those technologies. Right? But this technicist solution is exactly what started with the Industrial Revolution. Let me give you a very different illustration of what I call by technicism. Landmines. The country that produces the largest number of landmines, which are still a problem, even 5 decades later in Cambodia, still a problem, not to the extent that they were before. There's still a problem in Cambodia. There's a problem in the border between India and Pakistan. There's a problem between the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan and various other borders. The country that produces the landmines also produces the equipment to remove the landmines. So you have to be dependent on the same country for both. That's another variation of the technicist, right? See, so we'll have to look at the we'll have to look at the political economy and the logic, the moral logic of how these things work in society.
Right.
Yeah.
Bro,
Thanks.
thank you, Mr. Imran. I think we are approaching to the conclusion in a sense. So I'm gonna pick two more questions, I think, from the chat box. One, I think, is that there's a mention about the state captures, and I think a part of it also involve the capturings of the mind of the ruling elites, right? Um, and there's a question of captive minds and whatnot. And there's a questions here about the second wave of Orientalism. I mean, Mr. Santiago wanted to ask if you can elaborate more on that. Maybe that's the first question. I'm gonna give two questions, I think, so that we can have more time to discuss about this. So maybe can you elaborate on the second wave of Orientalists in a sense that they are yeah,
The second what?
wave of Orientalists? I think you mentioned it. I think in your yeah,
I
second
didn't
wave
catch the second wave of what? I didn't catch the last
or
phrase.
wave of Orientalists,
Wave of uh,
Orientalists.
Orientalism.
Yeah,
Orientalism.
yeah. So
No,
can
no,
you elaborate on that as well? Yeah.
yeah. No, I didn't actually I didn't really mention anything about the second wave of Orientalism here. I think that what uh, see, if you look at Edward Said's Orientalism, okay, um, towards the end of the book, towards the end of the book, he gets to what he calls second order Orientalism. Second order Orientalism is when scholars in the countries that are colonized or have been colonized reproduce the arguments of the Orientalists. That is that if I use more colloquial language, they have totally internalized the arguments. I mean, a very good way to put it would be this: that if I look, for example, at the religion that I was born into, I mean, I'm a non-believer, but the religion I was, so to speak, born into, okay, Hinduism. Uh, the vast majority of Hindus' understanding of Hinduism is a totally colonial understanding of their religion, especially middle class Hindus. The ones who live in the villages, they've escaped this problem. It's the middle class Hindus, their understanding of what is Hinduism, you know, is in some ways you could call a second order Orientalism. Okay, it's not that they're reading the colonials scholars who and what they had written on the monstrosity of Hindu deities and all of that, or what Hinduism means. I mean, how did the Bhagavad Gita, for example, become the major text for so many middle class Hindus? Well, we'd have to really look at colonial scholarship, and then we'd have to look at what modern day Hindu commentators have done, which is to have absorbed that, and now they replicate that argument, and it's taken as an indigenous argument now, right? And this is actually becoming a substantial issue, if you ask me, in many countries. I would go much further than what the question asked, because I could put forward a proposition here, and we could spend hours and hours discussing it. But I'll put it forward. You see, even the word religion, when we use that word religion, we are immediately, tacitly, subconsciously implying a Protestant understanding of Christianity and using that to describe every other religion, including our own religion. And we don't know that, because every religion was fundamentally reshaped in the image of Protestant Christianity starting in the early 19th century. And there's work about that which has been done vis-a-vis Judaism, even, for example, of course, Hinduism, Buddhism, you know, these religions, right? So, do we want to call that Orientalism? Yes, we certainly can, but the problem there is not exactly, of the sort that Saeed was talking about, because what we're really talking about here is also a question of categories. And that's really going to be what I'm going to talk about in the second part of this lecture, which will be 5, 6 weeks from now. And for those of you who've stayed on until this point, let me express my gratitude to you for staying on for so long, and also mention that for the second lecture, if you are interested, Imran will. I'm going to actually circulate 1 or 2 readings, short readings, which I think if everybody was able to do those readings in advance, I think it would enhance the discussion as well. Of course, I mean, it's entirely your privilege whether you do those readings or not, and naturally, you don't have to have done them to tune into the second lecture. But that would provide us with a common basis, not only for the discussion, but for taking multiversity forward. Because what I really want to end on, this lecture is not really in that sense about myself or my own views, as much as it is about trying to to take forward this enterprise of multiversity, give it a new lease of life, and perhaps a new kind of footing, and bring in people, from really all parts of the world, if we can. Because I mean, somebody had asked a question about colonization, and the problem is that decolonization, the task largely remains today. It largely remains, notwithstanding everything that's happened in the last several decades: anti-colonialism, global South, post-colonial theory, resistance movements, whether on the ground and in the academy. Um, I mean, it was, for example, what happened in Gaza. I think for the first time in my life, okay, uh, I saw, for example, in the United States, and I think elsewhere in the world, the first time I saw the kind of support for Palestine I've never seen before. You know, so I think that incrementally, we might be seeing differences, but by the same token, we also saw a genocide happening in life in real time before our eyes, right? Before our eyes. And no one was in the position, no entity, no organization, no nation was in the position of being able to do anything or wanting to do anything. So that's also, I mean, yes, I'm aware of the heroic efforts made by South Africa, for example, when it went to the International Court of Justice. I've written about Palestine. I'm writing a very long piece right now about nonviolence and the question of nonviolence in Palestine over several decades. Um, so I'm aware of what's been happening, but I'm saying that yes, there are encouraging signs, but at the same time, this is the worst that Gaza has gone through since the Nakba at the time of the creation of the State of Israel. You know, so that's the other side of it, and which suggests very clearly that we are nowhere in the position of being able to say that we are closer to justice or anything of that kind, today.
Right. Thank you, Prof. I think we conclude at this point. We have another lectures, obviously, the second part of the lectures, and we will announce the date and the time and the details via email. I mean, I have a list of all the emails of the participants. And with that, I'll communicate the reading list or the readings that Prof. Vinay will be sharing with us as well. And then following up from that, the date and the venue, the time for the second part of the lecture. Again, I mean, thank you very much, everybody, for being here. I mean, it's a very interesting discussions at a time when the worlds are at a very critical conjuncture, if you like, with many things happening at the same time that really put us a lot of us in a very anxious mood on our day-to-day basis. But as Prof. Vinay mentioned as well, I mean, there are also encouraging signs that I think we can also look into and work with, in a sense, as we move forward. I mean, the colonizing agenda was always going to be on the table. It's still very much still on the table, in a sense, and it's very crucial for us to pursue today as well. Maybe, Prof, you have any concluding sort of remarks before we conclude and end the sessions today?
Well, I mean, I think I've said what I had to, and mentioned that that I'm really thinking of this as a collective, and I hope that people, some here, will become involved with this initiative. There's obviously no obligation on any part, and at this point, there's no. I mean, Imran, you will be working on the on creating an agenda over the course of the weeks and months ahead, and moving this initiative forward. But I think we'll need people who are seriously interested in the issues that multiversity is going to be. And I think the second lecture will make that even more clear, because that will be really a entire set of uh, questions which will have to do with the question of knowledge systems and the categories through which we think about the world and how we apprehend the world, and all of that, right? So I think that's where, especially those of you who are coming from the scholarly world, but you need not come from that world, because I think we need people who are active in any domain, whether it's art or whether it's public life or journalism. But uh, I think it will become more clear with the second lecture what Multiversity is hoping to achieve. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you, everybody. Again, sorry for not able to take all of the questions. Obviously, I think we have a very limited time, and I have to be quite selective on what are the questions that I think we can include in the conversations as well. But looking forward to see everybody and more people in the next lectures, and keep in touch. I'll be sending a follow-up email, and if you have some suggestions as well in terms of
Yeah.
engaging in the collaborations and maybe organizing another lectures with some of the works and networks that you all are doing, feel free to suggest. I'll be in touch via email. I can be in touch via email. So thank you, everybody, and have a good day.